episode is brought by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you!
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Red Raptor Writes. Recently, I did a movie review looking back on Disney's 2000 hit Dinosaur. Although I was never that big a fan of it, even as a child, I still found myself pleasantly surprised at how well it holds up. I appreciate it way more now than I did in the past. It's easy to see why this film still has its share of fans 24 years later. That means many fans out there ask me for an accuracy review, and I'm happy to oblige. As fun as a scientific look at dinosaur sounds, it doesn't escape me how pretentious this might seem. A scientific deep dive into a family film about talking dinosaurs from decades ago. Like, come on, it was never that serious. So I'll try to find a nice middle ground between being educational while having fun with the goofy premise. Hopefully we can still walk away having learned something new. I think I've learned a lot so far. It should go without saying, but not being scientific does not automatically take away from my enjoyment of the movie. This video is not to dunk on Dinosaur. It's not a documentary or meant to be educational television! So, although the gigaist of Chads, David Krentz designed the dinos we see and tried to keep them pretty consistent with the information available at the time, the filmmakers still have artistic license to make changes if they feel it improves the overall product. Now, with that said, the way I'll break this video up is first with some general observations about the creatures, and then simply divide it between the different dinosaurs featured when we get into some more specifics. Not all of them, but definitely our main cast. Plenty of attention was put into bringing these creatures to life, though loads of new information has come to light since. That means we have a lot to explore, so guys, let's dig this up. On a rewatch, there was a lot that stood out to me about Dinosaur. The awesome soundtrack, CGI that still looks good most of the time, and the willingness to go dark at times were all very much appreciated. But while not perfect, we're also given a general adherence towards the science, or what science was known at the time. Coming right off of Walking with Dinosaurs and the first two Jurassic Parks, you'll notice a similar dinosaur renaissance style for better and for worse. At this point, we've progressed quite a lot from the mid-20th century, but haven't gotten anything near the likes of Prehistoric Planet. So good. The dinosaurs shown all live active lifestyles expected from endothermic animals. Non-avian dinosaurs were able to increase their own body temperature through metabolic processes independent of their environment, and thus live more active lifestyles. This is demonstrated by the way each creature moves. Everyone stands upright, raising their bodies off the ground, and lifted tails parallel to the ground rather than slinking behind the body. Not a single tail droops. Unless someone's been viciously mauled. That causes some issues usually. But this is bottom of the barrel stuff. If you're presenting droopy or kangaroo dinosaurs, then you already lost. Going even better than some of its contemporaries, the dinosaurs don't get very shrink-wrapped, meaning they aren't simply skeletons with skin tightly draped over them. And they're also not these jacked beefcakes with calves that would crush your soul. Only a few animals suffer from this, most notably Baleen the Brachiosaurus in her skull. I'm going to be gracious and assume this was done to emphasize her age. I mean, she's old enough to think you still just walk in and ask for a job, or that young people can afford homes. Another trope of the time is a lack of feathers on the ones who would expect to have them. Carnotaurus, you're fine. You're chillin'. As for Velociraptor, Pteranodon, and Struthiomimus, they all need to be fluffed up. One obvious inaccuracy that I'm sure even the 5-year-olds are pointing out in theaters is how many clashing dinosaur species there are that never would have met outside of fossil collections. Our earliest creature here is Brachiosaurus, hailing from late Jurassic North America about 150 million years ago in the famed Morris information. Aside from her, most dinosaurs shown are Cretaceous, and even then, vastly different parts of the Cretaceous period. Iguanodon appeared about 126 million years ago in what is now Belgium and Spain. Yup, I intentionally did not include the UK in there because, long story short, that material has been reassigned to Mantellosaurus and Beryllium.
They stole it from me, Carmine! They took it!
Across the globe, many related genera that were formerly lumped into Iguanodon have been split over the past few decades. Watch my Dinosaur Britain review for more info on the history of Iguanodon along with its kin. Anyways, small tangent over, the incredible yet short-lived Coolosuchus lived about 120 million years ago in Australia because everything there just wants you dead, even back then. Pteranodon from the soaring introduction came about 85 million years ago in North America's western interior seaway. Next, we get a buttload of campaigning critters such as Velociraptor and Oviraptor from Asia, along with Parasaurolophus, Struthiomimus, and Styracosaurus from North America. There's Pachyrhinosaurus and Carnotaurus from the early Maastrichtian stage towards the very end of the Cretaceous, and our most recent non-avian dinosaurs are Ankylosaurus and Stygimoloch, which is likely an immature teenage Pachycephalosaurus from the upper Maastrichtian in North America. I have a whole paleo myth on that. Shameless plug, but go check it out. And of course, how could I forget the lemur family? Oh, the lemurs. My favorite, largely superfluous, poorly rendered cat-calling side characters. I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason, the filmmakers believed that early lemurs lived alongside non-avian dinosaurs in the Cretaceous, so they'd be welcome additions to the roster. That's incorrect though. The earliest lemurs didn't branch out until the Paleocene, just after the famous KPG extinction event. Interestingly, lemurs didn't first evolve in Madagascar, the one place where they're found today. According to Robin A. Smith from Duke University, lemurs were already diversifying in Africa before distinct lineages were likely rafted to the island independently, rather than arriving early in Madagascar then diversifying there. Propodoleachii, once thought to be a fruit bat, was found to be an ancient relative of the Ai, living in Kenya 20 million years ago. So lemurs diversified in Africa and then moved, rather than a single lemur ancestor making it to San Diego. When it comes to our mishmashed cast of different dinosaurs and lemurs, it can only happen in Animal Junction.
I feel dinosaurish. How about you? Dinosaurish. Dinosaurish.
Going back to Baleen for a moment, it is mentioned how she's the last, or one of the last of her kind. Viewers witnessed plenty of Brachiosaurus during the opening when Aladar is an egg, but none others since Aladar arrives on the mainland as an adult. Yeah, I don't know what, if any, reference this is making to the actual information we have. Does this represent a faunal turnover? Are we moving from the Jurassic to Cretaceous? Or is this just some throwaway backstory that doesn't go anywhere? If this is some significant change, then where are all the other Jurassic dinosaurs early on? How come we see no Stegosaurus or Allosaurus in the beginning? They were still only Cretaceous creatures, apart from the Brachies.
Allosaurus had never seen such proof before.
If you have an answer to what this is supposed to mean, then please let me know in the comments. As for the ensemble cast, there's somewhat of a mixed bag here. All of the marginocephalians, including Styracosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus, and young Pachycephalosaurus, each look pretty spot on. They're largely in the background, so you don't get a great look at them, but from a distance, no complaints. I mean, there's a ton of variation known in Styracosaurus, but the model Disney used may be a perfect replica of the specimen at the AMNH. The thick-nosed reptiles may have exaggerated features in their spikes and bosses, but not too crazy. Perhaps some keratinous extensions of the bone. Still awesome.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Probably the worst dinosaur in terms of its design is Struthiomimus. It suffers from every general problem here at the same time. Of course, being a Maniraptoran, it needs a coat of feathers. Next, you gotta fix those broken wrists, buddy. The shrink wrapping is bad. The skull and beak are far too wide. It's given an exaggerated eyebrow ridge. And oddly enough, there are two pairs of nostrils it seems, a design choice that later inspired the Tinosauruses over a decade later. I still get nightmares from that movie. So for Struthiomimus,
he's ugly! 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 Ugly!
Since we're getting into the weeds with different appearances, there's no better place to start than with Iguanodon, since one is our main protagonist. This is a dinosaur that has changed appearance many times over the past 200 years, since it was literally only the second one named in 1825 by Gideon Mantell. 19th century scientists knew about Iguanodon before the term dinosaur was even coined by Sir Richard Owen.
Not cite the deep magic to me, witch. I was there when it was written.
By the 1880s, we already knew the general appearance of the herbivore since 38 well-preserved specimens were discovered in Belgium. Excavating them? Now that leads to a whole different story. A story that we don't have time to get into, but I want to highlight a good point made by Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong, that since the 1800s, Iguanodon's changing appearance isn't about finding new material that fills in the blanks, as is the case with, say, Spinosaurus. It has more to do with our understanding of dinosaurs changing throughout the years. Again, at this point in 2000, we've passed the dinosaur renaissance, so the overall view of dinosaurs was getting much better. Looking at the body shape, some of the details that we'll get to are very much in line with Iguanodon, but the whole reads more Hadrosaur to me, with this long arched body and tail. Yeah, hadrosaurs are very derived, late-appearing iguanodontians, though for Iguanodon itself, it's not that closely related to the likes of Edmontosaurus or Parasaurolophus. This earlier herbivore should be more stout, shorter in length, but very built. And rather than being curved but overall parallel to the ground, they stood in a slightly more upright posture, not tail-dragging kangaroo lizard or anything, but kinda similar to Brachiosaurus with hefty front limbs that caused a downward sloping back. I'm also not a big fan of how their mouths were done. The paleo artists behind this design removed their beaks, giving them a weird humanoid lip condition. Disney wanted a movie about talking dinosaurs, so because Aladar and her species get most of the dialogue, they're transformed in order to mouth their lines. From an aesthetic standpoint, I mostly didn't mind this choice, aside from Aladar, who is entering the Mr. Incredible world of Uncanny. What makes this choice worse is what I guess is making an internal beak instead. You'll notice this weird block of bone in the mouth when Aladar talks. It's, unsettling to say the least. This doesn't remind me of Iguanodon as much as it does a boxer wearing a mouth guard. Save that for Rocky, not Dinosaur.
You call yourself the champ, you're a fake. The fight was a fake, go kill yourself.
On a brighter note, the distinctive Iguanodon hands were done pretty well. Of course, these guys are armed with a giant thumb spike that would have decimated potential predators 125 million years ago. They came built with a prehistoric shiv. Well, that's one explanation for the thumb. What we see during the runtime is the idea of it being used in intra-specific combat between rival Iguanodons. Rather than smashing a weight on their head, you just shiv them in the shower. This is what goes on between Crone and Aladar in their end confrontation. A really cool use of speculative biology in media. One last hypothesis is how the thumb would have been used similarly to other thumbs or pseudo-thumbs to grab food. Potentially lowering branches so the animal can feed, or maybe holding the leaves in place. This isn't shown in Dinosaur, but also worth noting. Another cool piece of speculation that we don't get to see is possible sexual dimorphism in Iguanodon. Within the single species of I. Bernissartensis, two morphs of thumb spikes have been found, with one type being wider yet shorter, while the other is thinner but longer. Perhaps males were using their longer spurs to fight over mates.
Well, these claws ain't for just attracting mates.
So rather than comparing jaw lines or the height of their broccoli cuts, Iguanodons just started stabbing each other. Granted, this isn't confirmed, but some interesting speculation. Aside from their stabby parts, the rest of the hand is pretty good, though not perfect. On the other side, for the fifth finger, it is a correct, long, narrow projection for when you have a prison fight at 3, but tea time at 4. And this digit would have been prehensile with lots of mobility, so maybe this was also used to help grab food items. As for those middle digits, the second and third were clawed at the ends, though sorry for Dinosaur, the fourth was not. We'll see this come up again soon, how in Archosauria, the clade that includes crocs, birds, and all their relatives, and all the groups in between, Only the first 3 fingers have claws, while 4 and 5 are left covered in skin or scales. Even in the quadrupedal ornithischian dinosaurs, which are often shown to have elephant feet, actually still had this arrangement. Iguanodon, though their front limbs were very specialized, were no different in this regard. Maybe not exactly up to date, it's nice that the limbs are distinctly iguanodontian. Before I move on to the film's antagonists, I should note that we see some major variation in Iguanodon here. Aladar and Nera look close enough to those ensemble members in the background, though different enough in color and face shape to tell them apart. You know, cause it is a movie with anthropomorphic dinos. While they have some funky features, they're not my concern. I have no idea what's happening with Crone and Bruton. These guys are like the super sigma males of Iguanodon with their enormous sizes, big displays, chiseled jaws. Just look at how huge Bruton is compared to our main character. Now, there's no logical explanation I could think of as to why these guys are so edgy. Could these be the final form of fully grown males? Well, not likely since no other Iguanodon look like this. Though Aladar is certainly not old, there's no implication I can remember that he's not fully matured. Okay, well, maybe this is some insane individual variation. Again, unlikely. Crone and Nera are supposed to be siblings, yet they look nothing alike. You'd expect at least some family resemblance. One other idea I've heard a few times is how Bruton is a different species named Alterinus curzanovi, a non-hadrosaurid hadrosauroid in early to mid-Cretaceous Mongolia, somewhere between 125 and 100 million years ago. Maybe that big boss on the nose points us in this direction.
But that's simply not possible.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid?
Yeah, I disagree. The crazy nasal arch of Alterinus doesn't seem to be anchoring a large keratinous boss. No, this is supposed to be a big, fleshy snout and a giant nasal cavity. Plus, this Asian species is quite smaller than Iguanodon, only reaching 6.5 meters and 1.1 tons according to Gregorius Paul, compared to the 10 meter, 4.5 ton knife-wielding behemoth. So although these guys look awesome, there's nothing that can adequately explain their appearances scientifically. Of course it helps audiences distinguish characters in the movie, but when it comes to accuracy, there's no excuse here. Next up, let's discuss those elderly dinosaurs who lag behind. We got Baleen the Brachiosaurus, Ema the Styracosaurus, and early Ankylosaurus. I'm not sure if Earl is actually supposed to be old. Probably not, though he likes hanging with them for bingo night and complaining at employees who are doing their best. Starting with Baleen, I called her a Brachiosaurus, but if you know, you know. Earlier depictions of this species, B. altithorax, were often based on the other African species, B. bronchi, which has since been separated into its own genus, Giraffatitan. So what we're looking at more closely resembles that sauropod. Although very similar and closely related animals, the American brachley has a proportionally longer tail. Their heads differ quite a bit too, with Giraffatitan having a taller, more pronounced nasal opening on top of their heads and a flatter snout than the material assigned to its relative. Because the African material became the popular image of Brachiosaurus, it wasn't until recently, after the split, that depictions of the genus actually resemble B. altithorax. Also, staying around the skull, Baleen's nostrils are way too high up, as this is typical for 20th century depictions. Lawrence Whitmer in 2001 published a study that argued for a much more forward position connected to the nasal openings by soft tissue, as is the case in other amniotes. Lastly for her, I'm glad that Disney moved away from the elephantine feet that's been plaguing sauropod and ornithischian depictions for centuries, but they're still not great with too many claws. As I've mentioned on the channel before, Brachiosaurs had a single sickle claw sticking out of their front limbs, and 3 weird outward-facing claws on the hind limbs. But that's enough talking about feet. I don't want to give Dan Schneider any new ideas. Next comes Ema. I have the least to say about her because her species, Styracosaurus albertensis, was basically perfected already. Any problems with this character model is simply to make her look old. Yeah, she's chunky and wrinkly, yeah, her face is super squished, but hey, I guess these ceratopsids don't age gracefully.
You're old. Look at yourself, old man. You got multiple chins, 'cause you're old.
I do like the detail of her nasal horn being ripped off. Apparently this comes from a backstory that was left on the cutting room floor where she and her husband fought an Allosaurus. Not in the movie, though it's cool to see some wear and tear on the dinosaur. The last of these side characters to discuss is Earl, Ema and Baylene's pet ankylosaurus, who pretty much just acts like a dog. Hey, wait a minute, why are dinosaurs owning other dinosaurs? Is this some form of prehistoric slavery?
3 square meals a day, plenty of exercise. Oh, it was paradise. We were in slavery.
Or if we do want to accept that this is a pet-owner relationship, then how come all of the different creatures shown, at least of the herbivorous ones, how come Ankylosaurus isn't given human-like sentience? Are they just dumb? Awkward questions aside, yeah, Earl is nearly as bad as the Struthiomimus in terms of design. The skull is all wrong. The species did have a wide head, perhaps implying a generalist feeding strategy. Too bad the horns are the wrong shape, drooping downwards when they should be pointing up and out. Also, Earl's eyes and nostrils point too forwards to give him a much more puppy appearance. As much as I love puppies, those babies are omnivorous carnivorans. They need those adaptations for depth perception to hunt prey. As a thyreophoran herbivore, Ankylosaurus used its adaptations to scan a wide field of view for predators such as Tyrannosaurus, Dakota Raptor if it's not a chimera, and Nanotyrannus if it's not a young Rex. That's a paleo myth for another day.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
Another cardinal sin here are those spikes. The creators turned the armor plates, the osteoderms, into full-on spikes, which, no, these animals did not have. Maybe this was just fun speculation that the bones anchored keratinous spikes, but A, they weren't shaped like spikes, and B, we could tell from another exceptionally preserved ankylosaurian, Borealipelta, that this isn't what they were doing. At least the design doesn't go full walking with and turn Earl into a big spike ball. No, his body is flat just as it should be. So, while heavily flawed, still better than its contemporaries. Perhaps the most iconic and influential addition to the roster was Disney's rendition of the fearsome South American predator Carnotaurus. Like I mentioned in the film review, it wasn't discovered until 1984 and named in 1985, so that's only 15 years of exposure before featuring as the main antagonist of a big budget movie. Another good point from Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong is that we don't have those outdated tripodal depictions of Carnotaurus since it came so late in the game. We already knew so much more about dinosaurs than we did when Allosaurus or Tyrannosaurus were found. Perhaps aside from the odd toy, this is the public's first exposure to the animal. Remember, there was no social media back then. It's not like today where a new species is named and then suddenly there are 20 pieces of new paleo art surrounding it. So as Carnotaurus' first stomp into popular culture, how did Disney do? Overall, pretty dang well, especially for the time. The antagonist is distinctly Carnotaurus, capturing many recognizable qualities of this iconic theropod. The head is very good, and no, that's not a sentence I say often. Jokes aside, their skulls are appropriately super blunt, round, and tall, not in a bulldog way either. These were very thin, kind of like a hatchet on legs. Not that it would have been used like a hatchet though. If anything, maybe its head isn't thin enough. Even the mouth that gobbles up Credo was done well, with unique upward curving jaws that almost ended in a point. Then we move on to perhaps the most defining feature that gave the genus its name, those two large horns projecting from its head. Despite being such a striking feature, there's no consensus on how they would have looked. Sure, we see how they point upwards and out, not forwards like their namesake and some depictions, and sure, their horns were likely covered in a keratin sheath, but beyond that, we don't know. Did they look like proper horns for fighting and stabbing? Were they vibrant ornaments for social signaling? I've even seen depictions of them covered in skin and flesh. It's possible that we could have known what kind of integument was on the Carno's face, since soft tissue was seemingly preserved, but confusing it for extra useless matrix was prepared away. Since we don't know the exact form the horns took, it's difficult to tell their exact function. Shoving matches in intraspecific combat is a popular idea. Then there's the all reliable display feature. and maybe the predator used them to ram or stab prey, maybe less likely on that last one. Here in Dinosaur, the horns seem to be the correct shape, though with the tips pointing slightly forwards, which is in the realm of possibility if there is some keratinous sheath. Too bad they aren't ever utilized outside of a bit of shoving, but I can't tell if this is some generic shove attack or a specific Carnotaurus move the filmmakers are trying to show off. Probably the former. There's plenty of pushing and shoving throughout the film's fights, so this shove here doesn't seem like some special super move. I guess the creators are just sticking with the generic display function. Moving down the body, well, most of the positives are in the skull, while the negatives are postcranial. But we do get the puny, minuscule arms, some of the smallest arms of any dinosaur, relatively speaking. Like other abelisaurids, the species maintain the 4-fingered hands of early theropods rather than switching to 3 or 2 like other lineages. Abelisaurids like Carno branched out from the more basal ceratosaurians rather than the more bird-like tetanurine theropods, so they'll have some basal characteristics. The arms are puny, but perhaps not puny enough. There still seems to be a functioning elbow along with claws on each digit, Carnotaurus retaining something of a humerus, no carpals to form an actual wrist, but the radius, ulna, and 3 of 4 metacarpals are so reduced that together they form what is basically an immobile wrist. The exceptions being digit 4, which is a conical rod of solid metacarpal, and digit 3, seemingly the only clawed one. And if it wasn't clear already, none of this was mobile. These predators couldn't bend their arms or wiggle their fingers, though the prehistoric planet dance is possible with their flexible shoulder joints.
Yeah, that's cool, but he ain't like me. LA.
With all those general positives, too bad each character in Dinosaur only refers to it as a Carnotaur. I still have no idea why this decision was made. Did the writers think it sounded cooler? Were the voice actors just lazy and didn't feel like saying the full name? Who knows? This is like the only named animal in the whole movie, and they say it wrong.
No, you got my name wrong.
Get out there, you moron!
Once you make it to the legs and tail, the Carnotaurus pretty much gives off generic large theropod. If it weren't for the skin, which I'll get to in a second, you wouldn't be able to tell what this creature is, which is a shame since Carno is very unique. I will say it is portrayed hunting as a pursuit predator that runs down its prey, likely in a single direction. This is correct even if the design doesn't show it. While the tail here is very generic, they actually had bizarrely muscular tails. What caudal vertebrae we have show processes that point upwards in a V shape in order to support an enormous caudofemoralis muscle. Crucial to dinosaur locomotion, this muscle connects the tail to the femur, pulling the leg back. It's a clear running adaptation that would have given it an edge over their prey. Often today, you'll also see Carnotaurus depicted with very long legs, especially the lower leg made up of the tibia and fibula. Yet another adaptation for high-speed pursuit predation, a feature that's missing here in Dinosaur. Well, when you look at the skeleton, we see... oh, we don't have it. Long lower leg bones are inferred due to being found in the closely related Allosaurus. It's very possible for Carnotaurus to have been similarly leggy, but we don't know for sure, so I won't deduct points for that one. Moving on, we gotta talk about the skin. Back when I was growing up, I remember in my dinosaur books reading about how Carnotaurus was the first carnivore we found skin for. Well, skin impressions. Polygonal, non-overlapping scales were found across the right side, including from bits of the head, neck, flank, and tail. But any classic rendition of the Abelisaur has got to have those bold osteoderms running down the body. Disney takes it to the extreme with these edgelord spikes jutting out. Well, first off, these are bigger feature scales, not bony osteoderms or spikes. And second, a recent examination in 2021 by doctors Christopher Hendricks and Phil Bell found that contrary to how the feature scales have been commonly depicted, no, they were not in these neat, organized rows running down the body. Instead, these would have been more randomly dispersed. Of course, Krentz and crew couldn't have known about a study 21 years into the future, but it is still an inaccuracy by today's standards. Before we go, let's talk about the most obvious flaw with the Carnotaurus, their size. These are some huge, chungus-sized monstrosities that would make even the Leoplerodon blush.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Of the single skeleton found, the actual carnivore would have been around 7.5 to 8 meters in length, about 2.5 meters tall at the hips. And though size estimates vary, they're typically somewhere between 1.5 to 2 metric tons. This was not a small creature by any means and would easily be the largest land predator if it were alive today. Still the apex predator in its environment for sure, but for a non-avian theropod, this is only mid-size. Think like a modest Allosaurus. Forget anything T-Rex size, this ain't even stepping up against Albertosaurus. Now let's look over at Dinosaur and...
What? It's just an ordinary... Oh my goodness!
Us audiences are never given an exact measurement of their sizes from the script, but in the fan wiki, the large individual is put at 15 feet tall and over 40 feet long. This still seems like an underestimation, but it's the best number I got. Just imagining the mass of such an animal would place it as one of the largest theropod dinosaurs ever. In the animation, there are two Carnotaurus of different sizes, one being much larger than the other. This is never explained since we get no insight into their relationship. One can be an adult while the other a subadult, one male, one female, which one's which, who knows, an older sibling, younger sibling, perhaps high individual variation. The world will never know unless there's a sequel. God, I hope there's not a sequel with modern Disney's track record. Because again, there's only one known carnoskeleton, it's impossible to confirm or deny such a variation, even if we did know the in-universe cause. Heck, even in species with dozens of specimens, paleontologists can't confidently report sexual dimorphism. Any such claim is usually a big uphill battle.
I don't know.
After reviewing the evidence, I think Dinosaur does a decent job at portraying prehistoric life. You know, apart from the anthropomorphisms, where they could get away with it, the designers went as accurate as they could, especially for the time. Most flaws come when needing to go in and Disneyfy the dinos. We know if studio meddling wasn't a thing in a better alternate universe, we would have gotten a very different film that I would very much want to see. As it stands, there's a lot done well, and so many compromises though that Henry Clay would be proud. Sorry you never became president, buddy. I think I'm feeling an okay C. Thank you everyone so much for watching as we deep dived into the well of nostalgia. I had a great time revisiting this underappreciated classic. Even if it was tampered with, even if it doesn't hold up that great scientifically, it's still an enjoyable watch, and I learned to like it even more than I did growing up. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to please leave a like, subscribe, and to check out my social media. See you next time.